American rivers are a timeless romantic symbol for a burgeoning nation, unbridled energy and forward momentum. However, as the nation industrialized, that unharnessed power was instead seen as wasted and the river deemed a resource to be capitalized upon. Potentially, a river's natural channel and bank characteristics were not the most efficient progression, and this ecological pool of prosperity could be more beneficially a pool of monetary wealth. The two agencies responsible for the majority of federal dam construction are the Army Corps of Engineers, established in 1802, and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation in 1902. Their jurisdictions generally lie where the Bureau's dams prioritize water storage and delivery, while the Army Corps of Engineers support flood control and navigation. The elusive dissension of dam projects can be illustrated by the cyclical nature of channelization to flooding and the perpetual engineering employment machine that supports and/or mitigates from the two. As dams are often constructed out of a need for one of those two things, flood control or diversion, it seems strange the two objectives could arise from the same mechanism. The exploitation of the U.S.'s rivers has a long and contentious history, beginning with the Colorado River, an 1869 expedition by John Wesley Powell, and the various interstate country treaties, compacts, and regulations that govern the equitable division of water resources throughout a region. These three dissimilar variables were the breeding ground for the entwinement that water projects have within our political system today. The turbines literally seem to control the flow of cash from corporations to government and back again in the form of tax incentives. The majority of large dams in the U.S. are gravity arch dams, where the energetic load is transferred by way of gravity as well as horizontal arching. The stability in this type of dam relies on the integrity of inward compression on the dam via water versus gravity pushing down on the system, which in turn allows these dams to be constructed more thinly, using less materials, so more cheaply. These dams have large reservoirs impounded behind their barriers where the upstream energy comes to a halt. That force of life is not only fluvial, but contains a trove of vital components of the ecosystem, including flora and fauna, nutrients to be deposited, and critical land mass that must be continuously redistributed to our delicate deltas. More than 50,000 large dams choke at least 60% of the world's rivers. Boulder Canyon Dam, for example, on the Colorado River cost $108 million, with the assumption from the government that all of which will be repaid with interest in 50 years under contracts for the sale of hydroelectric power. But what will the long-term cost be to ecosystem health and sustainability?
Broad-scale construction of dams has created a serious issue related to both floodplain and river delta formation. Dams create a barrier that captures sediment and prevents it from being transported downstream and ultimately being deposited on floodplains and deltas. How quickly a reservoir is filled with sediment varies depending on its location within the watershed. The ratio at which sediment fills a dam is known as its delivery ratio. This is calculated by dividing the amount of sediment produced within a watershed by the amount of sediment that is captured at the outflow point of a reservoir. The amount of sediment produced within a watershed completely depends on regional geology and hydrometeorology. Areas that receive large amounts of precipitation and have geologic formations that are prone to weathering will generally produce more sediment, and reservoir sedimentation occurs more rapidly. Some reservoirs within China's Loess Plateau experience a nearly 10% rise in sediment every single year, leading to robust efforts to remove the sediment and send it downstream. A study conducted in the Loess Plateau estimated sedimentation for a relatively small watershed, approximately 0.64 square kilometers, using a WATEM/SEDEM model. The model estimated that between 1958 and 1972, approximately 197,000 tons of sediment was deposited behind the dam in the watershed. The delivery ratio in this study was found to be 83.6%, meaning that approximately 84% of the sediment that was eroded in the watershed was trapped behind the dam. Each watershed is unique, and these sedimentation rates vary greatly. Each watershed in question should be evaluated independently, considering the regional geology, occurrence of flood events, and annual precipitation.
Sediment transport is the movement of organic and inorganic particles by water. Distribution of sediment in watersheds is a natural process that forms the physical and chemical characteristics of the watershed. Transported sediment may include mineral matter, chemicals, and pollutants, as well as organic material. When this natural process is altered by building dams, there are negative impacts downstream. Dams create reservoirs behind them which prevent sediment from naturally flowing downstream. This deprives the downstream areas of sediment that are essential to maintaining channel form and supporting the riparian ecosystem. Reduced sand and gravel can lead to channel incision and destruction to bridges and other infrastructure. As less sediment is deposited downstream, more erosion occurs. For example, the Mississippi River Delta has lost over 4,800 square kilometers due to reduced sediment from trapping in upstream reservoirs. Downstream erosion also leads to the degradation of aquatic habitat quality, including loss of gravels needed by many fish species for spawning. Some watersheds have native species that are close to extinction due to habitat loss. Additionally, severe sedimentation behind a dam can cause abrasive damage to spillway outlets, which could eventually cause a premature failure.
Dams limit the availability of water to downstream people and ecosystems, and the physical and chemical quality of released water is often altered drastically. The trapping of sediments and nutrients and thermal stratification in reservoirs are the physical processes that drive most water quality changes from damming water. Low-latitude dams have the potential to discharge cooler and anoxic-deep water, which can degrade downstream ecosystems by altering thermal regimes or causing hypoxic stress. Many aquatic insects are sensitive to alterations in thermal regime, with specific temperature thresholds required for completion of various life cycle phases. Since macroinvertebrates form an important prey base for fish and other larger organisms, there will be cascading effects when insect life cycles are disrupted. Dam reservoirs are also capable of efficient trapping of sediments and bedload, transforming or destroying downstream ecosystems such as floodplain and deltas. Floodplains and deltas depend upon rivers to deliver sediment and nutrients to maintain habitat quality and productivity. Dam-induced oligotrification through sediment and nutrient trapping can also alter the ecological functioning of rivers and their floodplains, deltas, and coastal waters. Globally, 12% to 17% of global river phosphorus load is trapped behind dams. Dams also dampen seasonal hydrological peaks, reducing overbank flooding of downstream river reaches. Hypoxia of reservoir tailwaters is another challenge caused by dams. The management techniques that can be utilized to control dissolved oxygen content include turbine venting, turbine air injection, surface water pumps, oxygen injection, and aerating weirs.